Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Ms. Celia and her associates for having me this afternoon. Speak a little bit about something that I'm incredibly passionate about, and that is wine. As Ms. Celia mentioned, my entire inventory is temperature humidity controlled. It is indeed a rare thing. I find that quite unfortunate, but I feel that wine is very much a living thing. Unfortunately, too many people in this business, it could be a box of wine, it could be a box of rubber hoses, they don't really care. Just stack it high and watch it fly is sort of the mentality. It's not one that I partake in. There is, as Celia mentioned, I deal exclusively in European wines, and there are, to be sure, good wines being made the world over. A lot of times people tend to pigeonhole me and my taste and say, well, he's sort of a snob. It's not the case. It is that when I buy wines for myself, I buy European wines. There's a categorical difference between what happens in Europe and what happens in the rest of the world. That is partially due to climate, it's partially due to soil type, and it's partially due to basically a philosophical difference in approach to what wine is and what should be. To make a generalization, Europe, or the European countries, tend to, in my estimation, make a market for their wine, as opposed to the New World, which tends to make their wines for a market. Tend to make their wines for what the market wants. And this is something that's to me just runs counter to what wine should be and the role that it plays. There are two main facets when it comes to pairing food and wine that I think are too often overlooked. And they're closely related. The first being acidity, the second being alcohol. Acid is it's a natural component of any fruit, any vegetable. It has acid. If you think of basic growing principles, the more ripe something gets, the more sugar it has. The more sugar it has, the less acid it has. These are directly related. As it pertains to grapes and the process of making wine, the more sugar you have, if you're going to make the wine dry, and I actually should back up and make a distinction, a lot of people get confused on what is dry and what is sweet. And then there's also, they could say, fruity. A wine that is dry has no residual sugar, so there is no sweetness to it. To get a wine dry, you have to ferment all of the sugar out, and by doing that, you have the yeast that consumes the sugar, converts that sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide, are the two byproducts. If you have a high sugar level in your wines, again, to ferment all that sugar out, you're going to end up with a high alcohol level. I don't know if that makes sense, but so you start with a lot of sugar. If you want it dry, you have to ferment it. You get high alcohol. If you leave the sugar in, you get lower alcohol. Going back to the acidity, acid in wine is what gives the wine structure, it gives it focus, and what gives it standing with food. Whenever you're thinking about pairing food and wine, it's really just basic chemistry, and it's really not that far removed from when you're cooking food. You want to have balance, and it is that balance between, again, acidity, sweetness, and then ultimately alcohol that makes a wine make sense at table. A lot of people tend to get a little bit too fussy when they're pairing food and wine. Try to pay too much, like, well, is this an exact match, or is it not? At the end of the day, quite honestly, wine is supposed to be enjoyable. It's quite simple, whether you like it or not. That's ultimately what matters. I think a lot of people get too wrapped up into, and like I said, is this the perfect wine for this dish or not? If you look on the handout that I gave you, I passed the first sheet. The second sheet is a few bullet points, some things that I think that people really ought to keep in mind when approaching wine in general, but even when trying to pair it with food. As I said, wine ultimately is simply it should be an enjoyable thing. And the first line that I have here, it sounds simple, but it really is quite true. If you know what you like, you literally know more than most people. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people tend to be somewhat sheep-like, and they just sort of go along with whatever somebody else says or this is presented, and, well, maybe I don't like it, but I think that people tend to discount their own judgments, their own opinions, say, well, I'm just not sophisticated enough or I don't understand wine. Really, it's not the case. You either like it or you don't. And that's really that simple, and it's that fine. Again, the second thing about red meat, red wine, white meat, white wine, to me, I think it is, as they say, an old term, poppycock. I don't subscribe to it whatsoever. Quite often, just last night, Katrina and I had just a real basic chicken wing dish, and we had a Pinot Nero. Beautiful Italian Pinot Noir that worked perfectly. Third thing, terroir, and this is I'd say really an idea. It is a real thing. What is terroir? It is the culmination of soil type, climate, sun, rain, wind, drainage, orientation to the sun, all of these things working in concert to, in effect, give wine its soul. The Europeans tend to label their wines by place, not by grape. And this is where I think a lot of people tend to get intimidated with European wines, is that, well, this says Montagny, or this says Margaux, or Gevrey Chambertin. What does that mean? That is that place, all right? And that is ultimately far more important than whoever made the wine. And if you look on a lot of, especially French labels, the proprietor, the winemaker's name is often the smallest text on the label. Or the biggest text is the place, and that is, again, far more important. But the laws in Europe regulate what grapes can be grown there. So if you know the place, you know the grape. And I understand there are a lot of places, and it can be, again, kind of confusing, but you're not just allowed to grow, let's say, like I said, Gevrey Chambertin is going to be Pinot Noir. Actually, the third page, if you want to flip over. The next page, I have sort of a breakdown of the regions and what the primary grape varietals are. Again, you can't just plant whatever you want to. This is a bit of a foreign concept here in America, and at the risk of making a generalization, in American psyche, is that you can just do we can do what we want to. This is my land. I'm going to plant whatever I want and make and I guess you should be able to do that. But not so much there. I mean, if it says it's Gevrey, it's going to be Gevrey, and that's going to be Pinot Noir. You just can't do it. And if you want to grow Zinfandel there, by all means go ahead, but you're not going to be able to call it Gevrey Chambertin. It's not going to happen. As I yammer on here, if you keep flipping through, there's a number of other maps, and I included the maps in the book because I want people I wanted you guys to get a sense of where these places are. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, this is France, that's Burgundy, or it's Bordeaux, but it is an actual place. And tying into another wine that I think is often underutilized, Champagne, again, sort of like Kleenex or Xerox, is a term that's unfortunately been somewhat bastardized to encompass an entire style of wine. It's not. Champagne is a very specific place. Only wines that could come from that area can be called Champagne. So they are all sparkling wines, but not all sparkling wine is Champagne. But like I said, going back to terroir, it is an absolute real thing, and it is what gives the wine its soul and what differentiates one place from another. I would encourage you all to come by the shop, and we can do this sometime. I could line up 3 wines from the same winemaker, same grape varietal, same winemaker, same vintage, all 3 wines made the same way. Your head would explode, the difference. And it really is, it's that singularity of place, that these grapes grown here are different from the grapes grown over there. And that there's that individuality is inherently valuable and should be embraced. Here in this country, and then a lot of the New World producers tend to homogenize that. It's not so much, I don't really care what this vineyard does, or some do, but a lot of them tend to just sort of blend it all together, and we don't really want to deal with terroir or embrace it. We just want to make wine so that it tastes the same all the time. It's not, again, it sort of runs counter to my whole attitude towards wine.